Today, as I talk with Ben Domenech, editor-at-large at The Spectator, I also want to pay particular attention to our friends in Scranton and Wilkes-Barre on 94.3, The Talker, and to TalkErie.com, and to our affiliates in Philly and Pittsburgh and all across the Keystone State. Listen up. Ben and I are going to talk to you about this election in Pennsylvania. Good morning, Ben. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh, and it's great to finally have football back.
Isn't it?
I have to say, isn't it? It's just you get to that portion near the end of August, and it's just like, man, I guess I can't wait for this. And I don't know about your attitude toward this season, but I just have I can't wait to have the distraction of it, to have something to focus on other than the election.
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit worried about Penn State. I'm a Buckeyes fan, coming as I do from Warren, Ohio, and Penn State looked awfully good last week.
They really do.
They might be the second best team in the Big Ten. Michigan screwed up. But I do think the Buckeyes, Georgia, and Penn State are the best three teams in the country. Do you have a particular favorite, Ben? Who do you root for on Saturday?
I have a couple of different allegiances since I went to William and Mary. It's not in the same category.
Your Navy's homecoming game.
My parents went to Virginia Tech. And I am not happy with the result, obviously, of that game.
Oh, that's right.
So I go along with them when they're rooting, but I also have a lot of friends who root for the Longhorns, and frankly, I think that the schedule that some of these teams have is really going to be so determinative. And if you look at Georgia's schedule down the path, I mean, the end of season is just brutal for them, and so if they can,
they'll make the 12, though. They'll make the 12.
Of course,
Georgia is a powerhouse. Kirby is so brilliant, and it's going to be Ryan Day, and Kirby will be in the 12, and then we'll see. Let me ask you on the pro side. Of course, we're only Browns fans here, and I should tell my new affiliate, if you're not a Browns fan, just go home. No, I don't mean that. You're probably part of the Cowboys. The Browns take on the Cowboys Sunday afternoon, late, like 4:15 or 4:30 start. Who are you picking in that one, Ben?
I like the Browns in that one. I think the defense is really good, and I think that Dak is in this kind of rough position this year, and I think that they could get a slow start to their season, given that, and given the fact that they really have to just rely on CD. They don't really have the same kind of weapons that they used to, and I think that the Browns' defense is just going to be really good this year.
It's awesome, and they just signed JOK to a 3-year extension. It's fabulous. But now here's a quick question for you. Yesterday, I'm listening to my favorite sports pod. I have a theory which I'm going to lay out to you, but this is a adjacent theory. I think sports pods are keeping old media alive in places like the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is now Cleveland.com, and my favorite podcast there. They've got many, like Orange and Brown Talk, Buckeye Talk. But they have Terry's Talking. Terry Pluto is 69 years old. He's been doing this since he started as a baseball reporter in Baltimore 50 years ago. And he is so smart. Dave Campbell's their editor. He is so smart. Yesterday, they raised the question, why are the Cowboys America's team? Because actually, there are all sorts of teams. And I hate the Cowboys. I have a theory, but I want to, before I trot mine out, why do you think the Cowboys is, quote, America's team?
Well, it's a wonderful branding, approach, and for, the generation of baby boomers that still, has such a hold on our thought process. They truly do qualify in that capacity, and of course, and when it comes to media, if you're talking about the Cowboys, you're getting more eyeballs than you are if you're talking about almost any other franchise, and so I think that's a big part of it too. Just that. It is a point of argument across the country in a way that you don't necessarily have, and the flashy characters involved play an outsized role in our discussion. But I don't believe that they're America's team anymore, and I don't think that they're going to be America's team in this season. I think that there's going to be a lot of rooting interest in these young quarterbacks across the league that is just very impressive. I mean, I'm looking forward to see what Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts look like tonight.
Yep. But my theory, simply put, is that Roger Staubach made them America's team because of the Naval Academy and because he was so good and because in the old days there weren't as many teams, that's when the branding began and it stuck. I know my late father-in-law, Colonel in the Marine Corps, all he would watch was the Cowboys because Roger went to the Naval Academy. And I think that actually began the network, that if you were a Naval Academy person, you rooted for Roger. I don't know, did your father-in-law root for Roger?
So he did, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Though of course he adopted and loved the Cardinals and became very close friends with Larry Fitzgerald. And
oh, interesting.
Yes. In fact, Larry was one of his eulogists actually at the.
We're talking about Senator McCain for the Steelers fans. They're a little bit slow, so we got to clue them in.
Yeah.
So Ben, let's get to the Steelers fans because God save us, the election hangs on Steelers fans. And so because of Vince Benedetto, who's a West Point guy, he owns a bunch of radio stations in Pennsylvania. I'm on from Scranton, and then Salem's got one in Philly, and they've got one in Pittsburgh, and I'm up on Talk Erie. I'm all over the state. How goes yesterday? The biggest poll of the week is the one that came out that showed McCormick is tied with Bob Casey in September. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think that Pennsylvania really is going to be an area where Kamala Harris is going to struggle more than without the kind of connections that Joe Biden had, at least in terms of the way he presented it to Pennsylvania, and just given the dynamics and the elements at play here, you see that the embrace of John Fetterman and that kind of thing, but that there was so much resistance on his side for walking away from Joe Biden. He was one of the last holdouts in that reported Senate meeting of Democrats where he was saying, you just can't walk away from him. And he's saying that not just out of personal loyalty, but he's saying it because he knows that's going to hurt them in his state. And so I think that Democrats should be worried about Pennsylvania. They should be very worried about the dynamics there because the case that they have in this election is not one that speaks to the priorities in Pennsylvania. And the whole culture war element of things, I think, doesn't play in a state that really has a lot of economic concerns, a lot of concerns that don't run in the direction of those culture war priorities that may make the other parts of the country more competitive in terms of her ability to reach into urban communities and that kind of thing that perhaps would have been a little bit tougher and has been trending in Trump's direction. But Pennsylvania is not one of those states.
Now, there are four big issues in this election: the economy, that means inflation, energy, and all that stuff. Crime, migration, that's all under one heading. Then you have abortion. It's a real issue. Then you have support for Israel, national security. That's an umbrella. I think Trump is ahead, and I just don't believe Pennsylvanians believe Kamala Harris on fracking. Do you?
No, I don't think so. And the other thing is that I think that she underestimates the negative reaction to someone who flips on a dime without explaining it. This is the most obvious question in the world. And yet when she was asked it in her one CNN interview with Tim Walz along as her emotional support puppy, the situation there was one where she should have anticipated that question and had a completely constructed answer for why she changed her mind on the issue, why she has a new position on it, because people need to hear a reason. It doesn't necessarily need to be a great reason, but they need to hear some kind of rationale. Instead, she basically just waves her hand and is just like, oh, yeah, well, my values are the same, and it's just, I'm in a different position now. People don't believe that. They have to have a rationale, a story that says, this is why I've changed my mind. Once I got into the vice presidency, I discovered this, and I think that this is something that's actually important for these communities, and and that's why I believe what I believe now. Whatever explanation she wanted to come up with, she needed to come up with one, and she did.
And Trump gave this speech. I played most of it in the first hour, all of it. It will be on Dwayne's World, his podcast later today. He hammered on energy, hammered on energy, because it's the only way to bring down costs. You've got to lower the cost of producing goods and transporting goods. And you can only do that with energy. Do you think that's getting through, Ben? 30 seconds to the break. We'll talk during the break and then come back.
I think that it is getting through, and I think that people are beginning to understand that this is an area where they need to have some focus and really hit at the Democratic ticket. They are radicals on this issue. People understand that they're radicals, and I think that this is, Trump's focus on those four issues that you talked about is, I think, going to be the decisive element of the run to the finish line.
Ben, J.D. Vance was on the program on
Hmm.
Wednesday, and I asked him about Tim Walz and what his problems were, and he said, well, to begin with, he's a little too close to Hamas and the people who support Hamas up in Minnesota. And we put out a press release like we did because I thought, wow, that's provocative and it's interesting. No pickup, zero pickup. It's like the media will not touch anything about Hamas and the Democratic Party and the pro-Palestinian. The demonstrators are back at Columbia. They're so afraid of it. The media is so afraid of it. What do you make of JD's comments? He's a little too close to Hamas and about the issue generally in election 2024.
Well, I think that first off, the fact is that he is on paper too close to Hamas. You've,
Yep.
I'm sure, read the comments or probably talked about them on here that he's given now in a number of different responses that he's had in interviews. And Walz his rationale on things creates this whole moral equivalency that is completely unacceptable, and it's not something that anybody should stand for. So when Vance, I think, goes after him, and he's shown it in his capability over the last couple of weeks to really focus in on some of the radicalism that this ticket represents, particularly on foreign policy, and I think that that's going to be something that he continues to do all the way going forward. And this is, I think, what Donald Trump wanted when he picked Vance. He wanted someone who was going to be able to take on the Democrats and fight back, push back in a very convincing, way. And I think that he's showing his capability to do that.
So now all the national polls are a margin of error, and state polls show movement towards Trump. Generally, if the election were held today, and people begin voting today in Pennsylvania and Delaware, and pretty soon they start in Georgia, who wins?
Well, I think if people were voting today, it would be perhaps a close Harris win, but the trajectory does not look good for her, meaning it's all margin of error. It's all very close. But I think that what's happened is we've seen them come out of Chicago without any bump because they already got as much of a bump as they were going to get from the ticket change. And I think that Donald Trump, as long as he has the ability to keep focus on these different radical policies that these people represent, I think that the momentum really is going in his favor now. And I think that there's concern among the Harris team about how to deal with that, in part because, they're scared about putting her out there more in any kind of unscripted environment because she's shown her capability to create such problems for herself. That's why
she's a terrible candidate. I mentioned in the first segment your late father-in-law. I still say the funniest moment in 25 years of radio is when, after Trump beat up on me one day, Senator McCain called up and said, "Hugh, loser, Hugh Hewitt." And it was the funniest damn thing I've ever heard. She has no capacity for humor at all, does she?
No. It's totally, and for someone who laughs as much as she does, it's really ironic. But I do think that one of the things that we should keep in mind here is the whole narrative about her is that she represents like this inspiring force for the new, when in reality, what she actually represents, to me at least, is something that is going backward. It's actually removing the candidate from being closer to the people. It's pushing her further away from a capability to talk to normal, everyday Americans. Instead, you have all of these scripted events, even down to the Doritos incident, where it's like we have to plan everything, and because if we don't plan it out, then she's going to make a mistake. And I think that her inability to do this, her capacity for being able to relate to normal people is just so low that it's going to be a continual problem, even in this short race to the finish.
Ben, I don't get to give advice to Donald Trump. I'm not on his team. But if I could, I did it to Larry Kudlow asked me this week on what would your advice be, and I said, don't pay any attention to her. Say nothing to her. Respond to nothing. Ask the moderators questions that they should be asking her. If it was possible to do it without being too brusque, I'd say talk to the hand. Just nothing. Yeah. Don't respond to her, and go after the moderators for not asking her tough questions. What's your advice to Donald Trump?
I think that's really good advice. I think one of the things that he should be prepared for is for the moderators in this instance to try to tee up some questions that speak more to her issue set, meaning that they're going to, I think, ask about a lot of the different race and culture war focused things to a much greater degree than they did in the first debate with Joe Biden, in part because that's more of her comfort zone. At the same time, I think that there's a real opportunity for her there's a real opportunity that she will end up running into some serious challenges when it comes to answering questions about foreign policy and about things like her switch on fracking, things like that. And I think that Trump would be wise to just let that play out. Like, he shouldn't respond to any of bait that she's planned to throw at him. He shouldn't, take any of those kind of opportunities to go after her and become nasty on stage. That's, I think, the one thing he needs to really guard against. Instead, I think he has, even though they're very different candidates, letting her tie herself in knots is not a bad approach here, because I think that she's shown her capacity to do it time and again.
Ben, I am working on a Washington Post column, which I think is next week, and it's about the rise of the pods. What's the name of your podcast, Ben?
The Ben Domenech podcast.
There you go. I have
original.
a theory. My theory is that this is a make or break moment for ABC. If they screw this up, if they go left, they'll lose. They'll shed audience forever. They'll be branded. In the meanwhile, we've got Ruthless, you, me, Dwayne World. I've got Highly Concentrated You. I listen to the commentary pod every day. Mary Catherine Ham, Getting Hammered. I listen to Dan Senor. I've got about 8 political podcasts. I think they're killing broadcast news because serious, fact-based, balanced. I know Trump's strengths and I know his weaknesses, and I talk about him. Do you think podcasting is a threat to broadcast media?
I think it's already. I mean, it's supplanting broadcast media in so many different ways. The growth of so many of these different alternate sources is not just due to people cutting the cord and things like that. It's due to people wanting to hear different voices. There's a reason that ESPN is paying Pat McAfee all that money. There's a reason that you see the growth of Barstool Sports, and then there's the reason that you see the incredible explosion of political podcasts. And it's because that's the kind of discussion, the kind of quality back and forth that people want to hear. And where they're not getting it? They're not getting it from these 8-person panels that you see on cable news. They're not getting it from the kind of very structured approach to defining who is and who isn't on the right. And they certainly aren't getting it from a situation where it's a 7-on-1 with poor Scott Jennings, doing
I know.
his job to fight
that
back
guy
against,
he's amazing.
It's amazing you can put up with it. But I think that the thing that people actually want is a back and forth debate. They want back and forth discussion, and they want to have different perspectives.
The poor guys at Ruthless yesterday, Ben. I want to make sure people hear this, and we'll talk during the break. Brian Stelter's going back to CNN. I like Brian, right? I know he's a lefty, and I know he's wrong, but I like him. The guys at Ruthless just absolutely crushed him yesterday. What do you think about CNN bringing back Brian Stelter?
It's honestly, it's not the worst thing in the world. The problems of their coverage, I think, didn't start and end with Brian, but he certainly was, a part of a lot of the coverage there that I think is, was unwilling to really look at itself in the mirror and change anything about what they did in the aftermath of promoting the whole Russiagate approach. That's something their attitude, for instance, you can go back and see the clips of him talking about the Hunter Biden laptop and stuff like that. And they never really do that reckoning. They never go back and say, well, what did we do wrong? How did we
Yeah, and I haven't even mentioned Hunter's plea deal yesterday. He could go to jail for 17 years, but it's going to be more like 17 days because after the election, he's going to get commuted. Ben, I think there's a generational change coming in the conservative commentariat. I've always been center-right. You've always been center-right. But I'm 69 and you're under 50 by a lot. I listened to Ruthless yesterday. Those 4 guys. Josh Holmes has been on the show once, but I love all of them, the fellas. I think Smug is hilarious. And it was a hilarious podcast. It's an R-rated podcast. Mary Catherine Ham comes on here once a week, and I listen to her and Vic every single day. Dwayne's got Dwayne's World. I think we, meaning older people like me, I was on with Larry Kudlow this week, Grover Norquist, and Rich Lowry, after which I reflected, my God, the total age of that group is 5,000. We're like Methuselah. And eventually, we have to give way. Are you optimistic about the rising conservative commentariat and their ability to keep pace with Pod for America, which really did blazed this trail. They really did prove that there was a demand signal for serious. They're lefties, but there's a demand signal for serious extended conversation. Do you think the new generation, including you, is up to this?
Well, I certainly think that it's up to the commentary side of it. I mean, that when it comes to the kind of diaspora of younger commentators or millennial commentators, who are now, of course, we're in our 40s, the older set of us.
Yeah, Guy Benson's 40, I think, now, or 39.
And so, and there are a number of people who I think have been doing this professionally long enough in some capacity that they've really honed their skills and become very solidly, commentating on things in a smart and intelligent way. The thing that I'm really worried about, though, Hugh, is this. Given the number of different entities that are out there that are on the right, that have significant financial backing, they have they have staff that is professional and
Ben Shapiro, you betcha, his empire,
of course. Yeah, they're actually producing far less solid journalism than I think they need to be. The fact that the left has an entity like ProPublica, with the resources that it has, is something that we really don't have on the right. And I know in the old days, it would, people like Andrew Breitbart, had hopes of building something that could contend with the New York Times or then the Huffington Post or something like that. That never really came to fruition. And I think that, organizations like YAF, organizations like the Fund for American Studies and other places like that have tried to invest in the careers of various people in the media, but guess what? A lot of the people that they've produced, they're writing from a leftist perspective now. Tim Alberta, Jonathan Martin, people like that, who have come out.
Tim is a good friend, and he was fabulous, but Trump broke him. John has been a secret leftist for as long. John's always been mad at me. I've had one exchange with him. He's a lefty. He's a hard lefty.
I mean, his column this week was insane. Saying that suggesting that Republicans are all secretly hoping that Trump loses.
Right, it's nuts. Politico is so far gone. But what's the alternative? What does the right need to do?
I think what the right needs to do is take a pause and basically say, how are we spending our money? Let's try to focus on building something that does contend and have the kind of research and investigative capacity of a place like ProPublica. It's expensive. It takes time. But there are enough journalists out there, young journalists. I mean, I highly recommend him to you. Gabe Kaminsky, one of my former interns who writes for the Washington Examiner. He has done an enormous, great investigative work over the past. He's won a couple of awards for it already as a very young guy. But that's the kind of thing where we need 10 more of those people, and we need them working together to unearth all the different stories that we're missing. I love Fox. Brilliant. I love working for Fox, but Fox can't be the only place that sort of is doing anything like this. And to be honest, Fox, as much as it's a cable news network, so it's focused on what's happening now. It can't do some of these investigative deep dives that we need to do in order to unravel things like the expensive campaign that is being waged by Sheldon Whitehouse and those and basically a host of Democratic funders to attack the Supreme Court and to try to get the Clarence Thomas impeached, things like that.
Ben, I always enjoy our Fridays. Thank you so much. Go listen to the Ben Domenech podcast. Go follow him on X at B Domenech and see him on Fox News. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.